The IPCC issued a stark warning to the global community. They demonstrated that the climate is changing faster than our capacity to adapt. And the message could not be clearer. We must speed up sustainable investments and increase their scope. Now more than ever, despite Russia's attack to disrupt the international order, the world must remain united in our fight for a peaceful, fair, and prosperous future. I would like to focus on 2 points today that you will cover in more depth in the panels. First, on public investment, which is needed to mobilize private capital. And second, on empowering workers with skills to drive the green transition. So let's start with public investment. Our immediate priority is tackling the energy crisis, which risks becoming an economic and social crisis. Already at last year's summit, I spoke about the unsustainability of the energy system, which is still dominated by fossil fuels. Now, since Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine, this has become even more obvious. Putin is using fossil fuels as a weapon against Europe, but Europe will not be blackmailed. We will not compromise on our values. We are determined to end our dependence on Russian fossil fuels, once and for all, and fast. For example, by diversifying supply, saving energy, and accelerating the rollout of renewables. Let me give you 2 figures. Last year, 41% of Europe's gas imports came from Russia. Now today, this figure is down to 9% pipeline gas. We were able to compensate these losses through increased supply by our trusted partners like the US and Norway. In parallel, we have filled our gas storages to over 92%, and this is significantly higher than it was last year. And we have managed to save 15% of the gas consumption. But we have to go and steer the medium and long-term transition at the same time. So we have proposed Repower EU, an investment support to cut our dependence on Russian fossil fuels by accelerating the deployment of renewables. Renewable energy is not only good for the climate, it is also good for our independence. It is clean energy produced at home. Gas pipelines are being built fit for purpose for green hydrogen. Interconnectors are being completed to create a Europe-wide electricity grid to support the mass deployment of wind and solar. So we are investing in the infrastructure and technology needed for a full transition to a low-carbon economy. Repower EU will come as additional firepower and acceleration on top of the recovery and resilience plans of the EU member states. To date, the Commission has given the green light to nearly 500 billion euros from Next Generation EU, of which half support the green transition. This includes measures in sustainable mobility, in energy efficiency, investments in renewables and in grids. Let me give you some examples. In France's plan, 85,000 ecological bonuses have already been distributed to support the uptake of clean vehicles. And this is just the start, because much of our public investment is designed to help de-risk and mobilize private capital. Like, for example, in Italy's plan, where Next Generation EU funds are being used to boost their national innovation fund. This is to finance private investments that have a positive impact on research and innovation for a low-carbon economy. The measure in Italy aims to support 250 small and medium-sized enterprises with 700 million euros in sustainable investment. So, this is the right way to go. Because we need entrepreneurs and private investment to help get the job done. And that's why we are here today. The green innovation is here. The public investment is here. And the path is clear. This is a truly exciting moment for all of us who believe in sustainable progress. And this brings me to my second point. People. The so-called human capital. This is a core theme of today's summit, and for very good reason. There are entrepreneurs with big projects and dreams, and companies with ambitious plans to decarbonize, who simply cannot find the professionals with the green and digital skills to work with them. In Europe right now, we have the strongest labor market in decades, but at the same time, we have a serious shortage of the right skills. This is a trend that has picked up especially in the last 2 years, as we recovered from the pandemic lockdowns. The Munich-based IFO Institute has found a growing shortage of skilled workers in almost every EU member state, across economic sectors, from manufacturing to services. For example, in construction, which is a pivotal sector for the clean energy transition, nearly 35% of EU firms report impairments due to a shortage of skilled workers. That is why I have proposed to make 2023 the European Year of Skills, to focus our attention and sustainable investment on this crucial issue. At European level, we've set targets on re- and upskilling and made available large amounts of EU funding. Nearly 1.5 billion euros in Next Generation EU so far, and 4.2 billion from the European Social Fund. But it is about more than funding. It is about bringing industry and training providers together, employers' associations with trade unions. The goal is to better match skilling strategies with the economy's need and our labor market. And this is an approach we are pioneering with the Pact for Skills. We have created 12 large-scale partnerships offering skilling opportunities to 6 million EU citizens of working age. For example, nearly 1,500 graduates and workers have already received training in the offshore renewable energy sector. This is great news, because offshore wind, for example, in the Baltic Sea and in the North Sea, is a huge and clean power source, both for Europe's energy independence from Russia and to meet our climate ambitions. Because it is the people and their know-how who drive positive change. Ladies and gentlemen, if we take a step back, we have identified where investment is needed. In clean energy, in green tech and skills, and the list goes on, for we haven't even spoken about biodiversity. The potential of green innovation and growth is immense. But to unlock this potential, we need to shift the entire financial system away from unsustainable practices towards investments that are truly future-proof. The European Union has created the most advanced sustainable finance framework globally. We're working hard to walk the talk on sustainable investment. For example, we're on track to be the world's largest issuer of green bonds to finance Europe's climate-related reforms and investments. So far, we have issued 28 billion euros in green bonds, continuously attracting significant oversubscription for our issuances. This is a boost not only to Europe's transition, but to the green bond market itself, as investors will have access to a very liquid green curve over time. Sustainability is much more than the right thing to do. It is also the safest and the smartest investment we can make. Betting on a low-carbon economy that gives back to nature more than it takes and reinforces our security is the most certain economic trend in the coming years and decades. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your pledges. And I wish you an exciting summit.
And following the words of the European Commission President on the importance for the EU to work with the trusted partners, we're going to hear next from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau.
Hello everyone. Bonjour à tous. It's great to be joining you for the EU Sustainable Investment Summit. Nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui à un moment décisif de notre histoire commune. Il n'a jamais été aussi important de lutter contre les changements climatiques, de défendre nos valeurs et de collaborer avec nos partenaires internationaux. The war in Ukraine has shown us that Russia is willing to weaponize energy. President Putin has already disrupted gas flow to countries in Europe and threatens to cut supplies completely. This has prompted an important conversation around energy security and put historic pressures on the price and availability of oil and gas. We know that Europe is feeling the consequences of this energy crisis, and we are here to help. Canada is stepping up to add to the global energy supply right now. And as we stand shoulder to shoulder with you, we must also look to the future. We share your ambition to accelerate the green transition. That's why we're taking big steps to make Canada the reliable supplier of energy that a net zero world will need. We're working with the EU and its member states to make sure Canada is a partner for Europe on clean tech and clean energy. Chancellor Scholz's recent visit and the announcement of the Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance, along with the Canada-EU Clean Tech Summit, were important examples of that. And as we move towards greener transportation, Canada is accelerating our development of the critical minerals that Europe and the world need. Alors que nous travaillons ensemble à la réalisation de notre partenariat économique durable, nous ne perdons pas de vue notre objectif collectif de mobiliser 100 milliards de dollars le plus rapidement possible pour le financement de la lutte contre les changements climatiques. À cet égard, le Canada a doublé son engagement international en matière de financement climatique pour le porter à 5,3 milliards de dollars. Nous pourrons ainsi poursuivre les progrès réalisés jusqu'ici pour aider les communautés du monde entier à mieux faire face aux changements climatiques et à s'adapter à des situations comme les phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes et l'élévation du niveau de la mer. By working together, we can create good middle-class jobs, clean air, and strong communities. We've already made tremendous progress strengthening trade and economic ties through CETA, laying the foundation for a deeper partnership on sustainable investment. We've all shown our commitment to protecting the environment, and this is no time to lose momentum. Alors, merci à vous tous d'être présents ici aujourd'hui et merci pour votre engagement continu à bâtir un monde plus propre, plus fort et plus résilient pour tous. Merci.
And the next keynote address for the opening of the EU Sustainable Investment Summit is coming from Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having me here today. Even remotely, I'm very much with you in spirit and in purpose. I want to start by acknowledging what has been at the top of everyone's minds for almost a year. The illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been the foremost issue for Europe and for much of the global community. Even though we are thousands of kilometres away, Aotearoa New Zealand stands with Ukraine. We will continue to work with our close partners, including the EU, to support Ukraine and to hold Russia accountable. Alongside the many tragedies of the invasion, the threat of climate change still remains, and we must continue to rally together to mitigate its impacts. Here in Aotearoa New Zealand, addressing climate change is a priority. This year we launched the first emissions reduction plan, detailing the actions across all sectors which we will take to reduce emissions domestically. In this respect, it would be remiss of me not to highlight the recently concluded EU-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. This FTA is a reflection of our shared view that trade should build prosperity for all, support efforts on climate change, and strongly promote sustainable development, including gender equality. That's why we're so pleased to work with our close partner, the EU, to ensure this FTA had high ambition outcomes in these areas to help deliver on a trade for all agenda. This FTA demonstrates to the wider global community our commitment to addressing climate change in all areas, including trade, as well as our ongoing efforts to strengthen the international rules-based system. It's now been 7 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted, and it's crucial we continue the momentum we have built. We must all take steps to green global finance to reach our climate goals. Redirecting investments to align with the Paris Agreement is one way we can raise finance in order to transition our economies towards a low emissions future. Aotearoa New Zealand continues to support sustainable finance in this way. Investment and climate objectives. Through this, we've invested in companies, projects and technologies that accelerate emissions reductions. Over the past few years, this Green Bank has committed more than $100 million and attracted another $150 million of co-investment to accelerate projects that will support a low-carbon future. We also furthered our commitment to climate change mitigation and environmental protection by launching a sovereign green bond program just last month. Money raised from the bonds will be used to support projects that help reach our pledge to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 and reach our net zero carbon target by 2050. There's growing awareness that climate action opens up a wealth of economic opportunity. But to realise these opportunities, we need to shift our mindset about how we invest. And we need to continue our investment into the critical task of decarbonising our economies. Because it will take all of us working together. That's why we're taking a collaborative approach with industry, academia, the scientific community and Indigenous Māori communities. We're also conscious of the need to support sustainability and development. It's why last year we announced a $1.3 billion investment in supporting countries susceptible to the impacts of climate change. Recognising New Zealand's place in the world, we committed at least half of that to the Pacific, which has already seen the consequences of rising sea levels and extreme weather events. I hope this summit offers many more ideas, builds relationships and insights to help us build a healthy, sustainable society for all of us. Climate change is the crucial challenge that we must all rise to meet to realise a promising future that our societies and those across the globe want and deserve. Kia kaha, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou.
And next, with the keynote address for the opening of the EU Sustainable Investment Summit 2022 is Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
President von der Leyen, Excellencies, we are 1 week away from COP27. Our planet is suffering. Pakistan has been hit by a flooding disaster beyond imagination. Europe experienced its hottest summer in 500 years. Now, many countries are heading towards a winter marked by an energy crisis. The horrors of the war in Ukraine should not put climate action on the back burner. Doubling down on fossil fuels is not the answer. The only path to energy security, stable power prices and a livable planet lies in accelerating the renewable energy transition. We must shift subsidies from fossil fuels and triple investments in renewables. We must remove barriers and make renewable energy storage technology a global public good. We must lower the cost of capital for renewable energy in developing countries where investments are up to 7 times costlier. Developed countries must finally mobilize $100 billion annually, and half of climate finance must flow to adaptation. The world doesn't lack financial resources, but for many developing countries, investments have dried up. That is why I'm calling for an SDG stimulus led by the G20 to increase liquidity for developing countries, to speed up debt relief, and to enable investment at scale in the Sustainable Development Goals. The European Union is leading by example with the European Green Deal, climate law, and the Fit for 55 package. We need the EU to be a bridge builder, including by mobilizing resources for international coalitions to support energy transitions in key emerging economies. COP27 must be a turning point that restores trust between developed and developing countries. I hope to see many of your leaders in Sharm el-Sheikh, where tangible progress must be made on mitigation, adaptation, finance and loss and damage. International financial institutions must step up, take more risk, and deliver. Every government, every business, every investor must play a part in building a sustainable, just, and prosperous 1.5-degree future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next, for the keynote address, it's my great pleasure to invite here on stage Othmar Karas, First Vice President of the European Parliament. The stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Honorable Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis, dear friends of this summit. 2 weeks ago, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, responsible for the Sustainable Goals, Amina Mohamed, visited the European Union, met me and some chairs of the different committees in the European Parliament to discuss how we can achieve and to support and to make our process to achieve the sustainable goals quicker. This summit is a very important meeting, congress, to show the people that the goals are in the center of our daily political work. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the European Parliament and its President, Roberta Metsola, thank you for the invitation to this very important summit. Europe and the world, we heard it, are in crisis mode. We are experiencing more global challenges at the same time than ever since 1945. Russia's war against Ukraine, the energy crisis, the pandemic, the climate crisis, all these challenges have something in common. They are about us. They are complex. They know no borders. They deserve no simple answers, and they cannot be managed alone. Global cooperation and global action are and remain essential across borders, states and ideologies. This is why this summit is so important, because it raises awareness, promotes dialogue and stimulates joint action, especially now ahead of the 27th UN Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Yes, we have set ourselves ambitious goals. Globally, the Paris Agreement and the Agenda for Sustainable Development. In Europe, our Green Deal and Fit for 55 package to become the first climate-neutral continent by 2050 or earlier. We don't know yet if our goals are ambitious enough, but we know for sure that we need to act urgently. We need political will and concrete measures to implement our goals rapidly and effectively. We can only build our sustainable future if we stimulate massive investment. 350 billion euros of additional investment per year are needed in Europe alone to meet our energy emission reduction targets. Further, 130 billion euros are needed for the other environmental goals. While the European Union is the largest provider of public climate finance, the necessary scale of investment goes well beyond the public capacity. An alignment of all sources of finance is required: public, private, national and multilateral. From the very onset, the European Parliament has been a strong advocate for the EU Sustainable Investment Framework proposed by the European Commission. And I have to underline on this point, it was also a success that we implemented in the Lisbon Treaty the sustainable social market economy as our economic, social and environmental model. The free market is a goal, but the free market has a responsibility for sustainability, for social coherence, and for our climate and environmental goals. With our Next Generation EU and Repower EU plans, we have launched unprecedented investment measures. With our classification system, the taxonomy, we define sustainable activities and fight greenwashing. With our disclosure requirements, we've increased clarity and transparency. And with our investment tools, benchmarks and standards, we incentivize the right investment decisions. These building blocks play a leadership role in global action, and we must continuously develop them further. But so much more remains to be done. We need the new EU own resources, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the review of our emissions trading system, and the completion of our banking, capital markets and energy union to become more independent, credible and able to act. And, ladies and gentlemen, we need the new collective quantified goal on climate finance and a dedicated finance mechanism to deliver our fair share of international climate finance goals and to provide support for developing and the least developed countries. In this spirit, this summit should not only increase global awareness, but also intensify our cooperation and support. The European Parliament I am representing today will tirelessly pursue its efforts for a green and just future. Thank you and have a good summit today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Othmar Karas, First Vice President of the European Parliament. We're going to continue here on the program, and there's something very interesting that we're trying to do for the second year in a row. Apart from identifying the issues and looking for solutions together and joining forces, we're also making pledges here. What we're going to do now, and we're going to check on some of those pledges made last year.
Hello everyone, my name is Carmen Ijosa and I'm the founder of Ananas Alam, a company developing textiles using agricultural waste, in fact, pineapple leaf fibers. And this time last year, I had the honor to present you Piñatex, our product, which generates life-changing jobs in rural communities. And it brings innovation and positive changes to the fashion industry. And the pledge of my company, this time last year, was to reduce further our carbon footprint by 15% by October of this year.
Dear and distinguished panelists and guests, 1 year ago, at the first edition of the EU Sustainable Investment Summit, I announced Generali's commitment to making new investments in green and sustainable bonds for €3 billion compared to year-end 2020.
Dear colleagues, at last year's summit, I made 3 commitments. First, I committed to push for 100 billion euros of green investment in the new cohesion programs. The programs are still being finalized, but we are on course to exceed this figure. The energy and climate transition is now even more important than ever. Recent events show us that this is not just about our environment or our economy, it is also about our security. Second, I committed to work not just with our traditional partners, but also with the new agents of change. We are promoting this in the new programs and will closely monitor it in the coming months. Third, I committed to supporting stakeholder capacity in key sectors, and we are doing it. For example, our new Just Transition platform has a particular focus on coal mining regions and has specific working groups for the steel, cement and chemical sectors. And we are supporting building renovation and capacity in this sector in cohesion programs throughout Europe. These are my 3 commitments, and we are meeting them. But our programs are still at an early stage.
And I'm very happy to say we have achieved that. And we have done this by partly manufacturing in Spain. We have reduced our carbon footprint by 12%. And by using alternative energy sources for our fiber extraction machines, we have further reduced our carbon emissions by 20 to 45%, depending on the country where these fibers are being processed.
I said we would achieve this target by the end of 2022, and I am proud to confirm that we have already exceeded our pledge, reaching a total of over 5 billion euro as of June 30. Today, we face several key environmental, geopolitical, social and economic challenges whose magnitude is unprecedented in many ways. To overcome this, we need an even greater collective commitment to sustainable long-term investment solutions that can deliver tangible benefits to European citizens and businesses.
So today I make a 4th commitment to closely monitor progress so that these green commitments continue to be met. Thank you.
And this is my message to you. Let us keep working for a cleaner and more sustainable planet. Thank you.
I am convinced this second EU Sustainable Investment Summit will further raise awareness and increase the momentum of this ambition across Europe as we strive to build a better and more sustainable tomorrow for generations to come.
The current energy crisis is a chance to move faster towards a cleaner, more affordable and more secure energy system. The future lies with sustainable energy sources. Let's seize the moment to accelerate the transition. Last year, the European Investment Bank supported billions of euros of investment in energy efficiency, helped finance over 11,000 megawatts of renewable energy, and eased the adaptation of communities in Europe and around the world to the physical and economic impacts of a changing climate.
Ladies and gentlemen, like never before, the issues of energy security and of the green economic transition are closely intertwined. The Commission's Repower EU plan represents a real, unique opportunity for governments and the private sector to accelerate green transition. The EBRD is strongly committed to support the Repower EU plan in the EBRD's region of operations. Given our established private sector franchise, we work to ensure that every euro of our investment mobilizes private sector funding to achieve the highest multiplier of our impact. We help to create an enabling environment for our sustainable investments in both private and public sectors. And we engage with the national authorities, banks and corporates to devise ambition and realistic paths towards carbon neutrality. Our investment and policy dialogue feed into and amplify each other.
Now we are stepping up our group-wide efforts in support of the Repower EU plan. The financing package involving both the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund, our subsidiary, will be substantial. Our direction of travel is clear. We aim to accelerate the transition to net zero and wean Europe off its dependence on Russian fossil fuels by investing in sustainable energy, energy efficiency, and green innovation.
From next year, all our operations will be aligned with the Paris Agreement. And we are committed to increase our green financing to more than 50% of our annual business volume by 2025. The ratio was already 51% in 2021. The European Union is our main strategic partner. In the face of today's multi-pronged challenges, we remain united to succeed.
The speakers for our first session are already on stage, but before we go into the panel discussion, it's my great pleasure to invite here on stage for the introductory remarks Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President of the European Commission. Please, the stage is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you today in person and see so many of you here at the second EU Sustainable Investment Summit. Welcome to today's first panel discussion on global transparency in sustainable finance. Transparency here is essential. Investors need clear, trustworthy and appropriate information to make an informed decision. Transparency is not only the best way to fight against greenwashing. It is also vital for promoting sustainable finance worldwide and helping us to meet our climate targets. This is particularly important given the energy crisis provoked by Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine. The EU is now working hard and urgently to reduce its dependence on Russian fossil fuels. Since climate change is a global challenge, our response also must be global. The International Platform on Sustainable Finance is a good example of global cooperation. The EU has been a frontrunner from the platform's launch in 2019. Adequate, credible and comparable information can stimulate demand for sustainable financial products, building trust among investors worldwide. This is why the EU strategy focuses on disclosures and sustainability reporting. In just a few years, the EU has created advanced transparency systems throughout the financial value chain, embracing companies through to investors. Starting with the real economy, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive will improve corporate disclosure of sustainability information. Companies have twin reporting obligations: to report on how sustainability issues affect their business and to report on their own impact on people and the environment. Draft reporting standards are now being developed by European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. Global standards and interoperability play an important role too, because many countries make a move towards greener economies. EU standards will contribute to global initiatives, and here the International Sustainability Standards Board initiative is a good baseline. It will help to achieve global alignment, creating interoperability and consistency. The EU will incorporate ISSB standards to the extent that they are consistent with EU regulations and the ambitions of the European Green Deal. And the European Commission will work towards an operational EU reporting structure that can inspire other partner jurisdictions. In addition, companies have to report against EU taxonomy classification system. By identifying which economic activities are sustainable, investors can easily know how aligned each activity is with environmental objectives. Taxonomy is a cornerstone of EU's disclosure system. And let me be clear once again. It is not a mandatory list of activities in which to invest. Rather, it's a vital transparency tool to fight greenwashing. For investors, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation requires financial advisors and market participants to inform their clients about sustainability ambitions. As we require new data to be reported, we need to make sure that it's easily accessible. This is why we proposed European Single Access Point last November. It will allow investors to find public information about EU companies and investment products in one place. It will give them seamless access to financial and sustainability-related company information, including sustainability data. These are all major steps towards improving transparency over the financial value chain. While received positively by the market, many of our recent initiatives are complex. We will keep working to make sure EU rules are coherent, consistent, and provide best information available. Transparency underpins the EU's work on sustainable finance. It underpins our efforts to build a sustainable future in Europe and beyond. A final word on trade, which can and should help us to achieve our green ambitions. At the last year's inaugural summit, I committed to building an inclusive coalition of trade ministers on climate. Trade has to be part of the solution, and we must lead by example. So, this is a coalition of those who are willing to enhance the contribution of trade to climate action and sustainable development. Working with the ministers of Ecuador, Kenya and New Zealand, I brought other ministers together from a diverse group of countries to spread this idea at the WTO ministerial held in June. This was a group of countries with different levels of development and geographical spread. The process is underway and we are now working for an inclusive coalition of trade ministers on climate. The coalition will build alliances and partnerships with climate and finance communities and relevant stakeholders. It will identify ways to which multilateral trading system can contribute to the global response to climate change. We can also promote trade and investments that stimulates the development, access to and uptake of goods and services and technologies that support climate mitigation and adaptation. This applies to developed as well as developing countries. The next step is to organize a meeting of the coalition in early 2023. So let us all do our part to step up the green transition. Since the EU works closely with the United States as a strategic partner, including on climate change, it is fitting that we now have an opportunity to hear from US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President of the European Commission. And as he just said, we're going to hear next from Janet Yellen, the United States Secretary of Treasury.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me at the EU's Sustainable Investment Summit. As your Fit for 55 package of initiatives makes clear, the European Union has been on the leading edge of advancing ambitious climate goals. As you know, climate change poses an existential risk. It also poses meaningful risks to our economy. In a world that continues to warm, regions that are prosperous today may eventually become unsuitable for productive economic activity. Climate change also exacerbates disruptive weather-related disasters that can have local, regional, and global ramifications. The contribution of extreme weather to rising food insecurity is just one example. We were reminded again of the urgency of our green transition earlier this year. Putin's illegal and immoral war in Ukraine has had a devastating human toll. It's also highlighted the risks of our continued dependence on fossil fuels. The Biden administration is working with our allies and partners to shore up European and global energy security. As we do so, our administration's position is clear. Investments in clean energy provide a more stable foundation for the global economy. We're committed to this future. Just 2 months ago, the United States took its most ambitious domestic action on climate yet. The Inflation Reduction Act keeps the U.S. goal to decrease emissions by at least half below 2005 levels by 2030 well within reach. We're encouraged by the number of financial institutions that have made voluntary net zero commitments. The U.S. Treasury Department is engaging with financial institutions to better understand emerging best practices for net zero alignment, how institutions are setting, implementing, and accounting for net zero financing activities. We're interested in finding ways to encourage progress toward shared climate goals to facilitate a smooth and just economic transition. We're also working to bolster the resilience of our financial system to climate-related risks. Last year, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, or FSOC, for the first time identified climate change as an emerging threat to the financial stability of the United States. Agencies have already taken steps to start incorporating climate-related financial risks into their activities. For example, next year, the Federal Reserve Board will pilot a climate scenario analysis with 6 major banks to enhance the ability of supervisors and firms to measure and manage climate-related financial risks. High-quality information is core to the strength of the U.S. financial system. We believe that climate-related disclosures are essential to both investors and the companies themselves. These disclosures enable market participants to price climate risks into their investment decisions. In addition, companies benefit from climate-related disclosures. It allows companies to identify, understand, and manage their own climate risks. And by providing investors with reliable information on their climate-related financial risks and opportunities, U.S. companies will be better able to compete in the global economy. The United States is taking steps in this area. For example, the Securities and Exchange Commission has proposed a rule to enhance and standardize climate-related disclosures for investors. Internationally, a broad range of jurisdictions and international bodies are currently working to finalize their disclosure standards and requirements. We believe that it's critical that the United States and the EU, along with other stakeholders, aim to create disclosure regimes that are interoperable. We applaud the efforts of our European partners in encouraging robust and transparent climate-related reporting by financial institutions. We also commend the European authorities' desire to uphold the principle of interoperability in disclosure regimes and avoid unnecessary market fragmentation. We look forward to working together to advance that objective in the months and years ahead. So, thank you for having me join you today. Your discussions at today's summit are very important to our work in the United States, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
And we're going to move now to the first session of the EU Sustainable Investment Summit 2022, Striving for Transparency Globally, and I'm passing the word to Hannah Branton, financial reporter at The Politico.
Thank you very much, and thanks for joining this panel. I'm a financial services reporter at Politico here in Brussels, and we've had the kind of scene set a little bit by Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, but in this panel we're going to talk through some of the kind of implementation challenges and opportunities of the new transparency requirements, the impact they're already having, and how they match up internationally. With me in the room is Matthias Berninger, Global Head of Public Affairs, Science and Sustainability at Bayer, Alfredo Pascual, Minister for Trade and Industry of the Philippines, and joining us online is Irina Tinagli, Member of the European Parliament and Chair of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, Mario Greco, CEO of Zurich Insurance, and Steven van Rijswijk, CEO of ING. So just to begin, if I could start maybe with the EU policymaker, just to explain, Irene, if you could, what the goal is here. We heard a little bit from Vice President Dombrovskis about it not just being about greenwashing, but why do we have all these transparency requirements?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. why do we need this transparency and the framework? We need it, first of all, to give clarity to the market players that want to cater services, that want to channel capitals to projects. It means to give also clarity to the investors. And as Vice President said, avoid the greenwashing. But this means, in concrete terms, to give the investors the information that they need to make sure to know exactly where they are investing, where the money is going. And this is also crucial to create and foster trust. I mean, financial services, even above and beyond the issue of sustainability, are based on trust. So investors and customers need to pay, to have trust in what the players are doing, and therefore the transparency framework that we're putting in place, I think it's a crucial, essential tool to enable this trust. Of course, there are many challenges. It's not an easy thing to do, but I'm sure we will have. I don't want to take up the time for all the other speakers, but these are the essential keywords that we want to pursue, and also create incentives. By creating transparency, we create an incentive even by not putting obligations. But if you have these tools, so you have incentives for companies to keep up and to be up to the challenge.
And Matthias, you heard there it's about trust, it's about incentives. For a kind of global multinational company, which requirements are starting to affect you, and how are you responding to them?
Yeah, I think first of all what we heard this morning, Hannah, is that the invisible hand of the market turns green. And that affects all sectors, all businesses. And at Bayer we also see those effects. The reason why I believe transparency is important, why I need to understand what are our carbon emissions as well as the carbon emissions of our suppliers, is pretty simple. In order to stay within the 1.5 degree limit, and it's not a target, it's a limit. If you go above 1.5 degrees, we will have some even more dramatic climate effects we have to deal with. Businesses need to cut their carbon emissions in half every 10 years. So for me, I will not be able to manage such a really, really difficult transition without knowing what our emissions are and what our suppliers' emissions are. And more importantly, I will not be able to demonstrate accountability, to demonstrate whether or not we meet those targets. Today, those targets are equal, sometimes even more important, to the financial commitments we are making.
And how does the EU's new regime help you then get those carbon emissions information?
If the EU aligns, like Janet Yellen just told us, with other important economies, and if we have a harmonized system, we will be able to globally operate with the same understanding of the emissions that are out there. And that's helpful. If there is no alignment between the countries, then we will rather double our reporting than cutting down our emissions in half. So we have to make sure that we keep it as simple as possible and that we use those targets and those reporting requirements to really drive investments into where it matters, and that is decarbonization. The challenge for the EU is that if they overshoot with regulation, then we get rather deindustrialization than decarbonization. And that is the conversation many of the industry players have currently with the Commission. Let's make sure that we get that right, that we find the right balance. If I compare the United States to Europe, and the Inflation Reduction Act was a topic earlier today, then Europe has more sticks, the United States offers more carrots. And what I know about business is this: if you offer carrots, investments goes in the direction of carrots, and Bayer is one of the largest seed producers for carrots, so we know a bit about them.
Stephen, how about for banks? Is the balance right between sticks and carrots, and what kind of requirements are hitting you already?
It never is. But thank you for being here, and good morning, everybody. But I think that from a challenge point of view, I think we need to have better data granularity, and we also need to make sure that the data is either stable or that we are catering for it being allowed to change over a year, because regulation becomes more granular, and it also means that the data become more granular. So that's still a challenge because it will not be comparable year on year. Secondly, I think that like all companies, we want to have a plan and be able to commit to that plan. And in some sectors, especially the hard to abate sectors, it's still quite difficult to see where they can go. I look at the cement sector, look at the number of the energy sectors like in oil and gas. It is quite difficult to transition everything and at what speed. And it needs also direction from the policymakers and the supervisors at what speed transition should take place, because that can then also help for us in our commitment in what we call Scope 3, largely our lending activities, to be able to then also stick to our plan and move on that plan on an annual basis. Because, like was said already earlier, at 2050, 1.5 degrees is a long time away. We've made commitments for 2030 and 2025. Those commitments are quite granular, but to be able to commit and deliver on those deliverables and those plans, we need to be able to see clear guidelines where these sectors can or need to go. And then maybe a third element that comes with the transparency requirement that is typically focused on European exposures. And as you know, ING is an internationally active bank, not only in Europe. So currently less than half of the exposures of our balance sheet would be in scope of the green asset ratio. And that may sometimes, if you want to have comparability, lead to confusion. So I think that's where we can still improve. And then maybe one more thing to say on the green asset ratio. The green asset ratio is a photo. It tells you where people or companies are. But we very much believe that we need to do this inclusively. We cannot just suddenly exclude a number of sectors from it. We should give everybody a fair chance, and all companies to give a fair chance, like we give society and ourselves a fair chance to make that transition. And that's not what that ratio is doing. And we should, because different sectors start from different starting points. And we should also be focused on how companies or sectors are transitioning, and not so much only on where they are at the starting point or are at the beginning of their journey. Those would be the recommendations I would like to give back.
Okay, I think we might come back to that transition point a little bit later. But Mario, if I could ask you as well, what requirements are hitting insurers? How important is it for you to have this information from companies?
Yeah, thank you. And very glad to be here today. Very similar answers. Our percentage of European business for Zurich Insurance is below 50%. So we strongly need international consistency. We really praise what Europe has done, and we think that the European transparency is the most valuable one that exists today, but we need international alignment. Now, we think that the International Sustainability Standards Board is an opportunity for that, but we would like to be sure that then the global baseline reporting that the ISSB has proposed will be adopted and will be adopted by everybody. The second thing, which is quite important for us, is to have clear price signals. Because still today, prices are not indicating or focusing companies to do the right things for sustainability. Carbon is now reflected in prices, and we don't think that the solution can be just achieved by forcing banning activities. There must be also an alignment with the pricing signals. And then the third thing I like to point out is that it is not just about financial services firms who have to drive transparency. As Stephen was saying before, we need also real data for the real economy to provide the same transparency and to show what are the behaviors that will help quickly reducing the climate risk and the risk of the planet being not sustainable. But as I said, I mean, we really praise what the European Commission has been doing, and the transparency that the European Commission is establishing is absolutely leading standard for the rest of the world.
Fred, what do you make of what the EU is doing? How is it seen in the Philippines, or how does it match up with the requirements in the Philippines?
Well, the Philippines has a very tiny carbon footprint in the context of the global emission. But we're doing our part. We have our own greenhouse gases reduction commitments. And to be able to measure how we're getting there, of course, we require disclosure. The requirement for disclosure now applies to publicly listed companies. This is a requirement of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's still on a comply or explain basis. Eventually, there will be a mandatory requirement for full disclosure. And eventually, the disclosure requirement will be extended to all corporations registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, with respect to banks, it's the central bank that has the responsibility. And we expect the banks to also play the role in enforcing disclosure by corporations. Without disclosure, no loan, for example. So that could be a stick. And the bank will be what we call the future maker in this sense. Because, as we say, if we want a sustainable future, we have to make it. So the banks will have to help or to do their role in getting clients to make full disclosure, and also to show that they have all the plans to avoid adding to the emission into the atmosphere. So that's the current state of play in the Philippines.
And how does it match up with things like the taxonomy in the EU? Is the equivalent?
Come again?
How does it match up with the taxonomy in the EU? Do you have the equivalent in the Philippines?
Well, we're using the global standards. Like for disclosure by publicly listed companies, they have an option. But the most popular so far is the GRI standards. So we're aligned with the global standards. But the problem, as has already been mentioned, there are so many standards. I think there is a need to harmonize these standards. And, of course, that will be led by the bigger economies. And we are prepared, to consider aligning ourselves with a harmonized standard.
Because that's a challenge for businesses globally, is the different requirements. Mario, how does that affect you as an insurer looking across countries? Is that a challenge?
Yes, it is a challenge, absolutely. We have very different standards. Of course, I listened to Ms. Yellen before, but you know that in the US, there is not even a common opinion on what companies should do on sustainability. And that is a real issue for companies like ourselves. 60% of our business is in the United States. Again, we need international coordination, and we especially need that the United States will be very well aligned with the European actions and policies.
Is that a problem for banks as well, Stephen? You need the whole of the world on side with these standards. We have the International Sustainability Standards Board. Is it important that the EU fits in with those requirements?
That's a rhetorical question. So I think the answer is yes. And look, clearly, the EU is ahead, but what I also think is that we need to find a balance between sticking to the ambition and also contributing to a multilateral approach. But we see already significant divergences in philosophy across jurisdictions. For example, the EU's CSRD and the US SEC rule are not the same. And if we can work towards a common baseline, that would be very helpful. Let me give you a few other examples. If you look at classification systems, that is difficult. Taxonomy is activity-based. Other frameworks are exposure-based. Different frameworks or jurisdictions use a different definition of what they call materiality, whether it's financial materiality or stakeholder materiality or double materiality. The scope is different. So these are just a couple of examples where harmonization is needed. And in the end, we should not lose the target in mind. The target is to transition the world and to make the planet a cleaner place. And we should set aside our differences. We really need to step up on this together, because otherwise we will be fighting over the definition matters rather than doing what we're doing it for, which is to save our planet.
Because the definition, when we're talking about materiality, double materiality involves a business reporting not only on the impact of climate change on the business, but also its impact on the environment, which is the EU's approach, whereas internationally there's a focus more on a single materiality approach. Matthias, is that a problem for you as well? Do you have a preference, single versus double, or what would you like to see?
My preference is that the Europeans, the Americans, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Korea, the Philippines come together and basically give us clear guidance. If we want to convince other economies, like China, for example, to move in the same direction, since we are so like-minded and since there is a political consensus that we really have to move into the climate action phase, then let's make sure that we come together and agree on something. Anything, actually. Yeah? Consensus on that is more important than what's in the details. We are currently reporting along the lines of what the Carbon Disclosure Project wants, that is looking more also in things the European Union wants to see. We are reporting against the Task Force for Climate Change Disclosure. They are looking more into the risk approach that Janet Yellen talks about. And of course, the people that are working on that, they're going like, we all have the same goal. Can we just agree on moving in the same direction? What I also want to say is we spent a lot of time on this morning, but that does not lead to decarbonization. What leads to decarbonization is that we spend more time on talking about what are the innovations we need to bring forward. We all agree renewable energies is one. But in February, in this case, IPCC, the experts on the field said, well, in the nature space, there is a lot that needs to happen. We need innovations that make farmers, for example, more resilient, that replace energy-intensive products like fertilizers. And let's not lose sight of actually doing something rather than just reflecting what's happening. So exporting innovation is much more important for the European Union than exporting regulation.
Fred, to that point, exporting regulation, should the EU be focused on, or should we internationally be focused on agreeing something at the ISSB, no matter what it is?
Well, the thing with the Philippines is it's a developing country. Okay, we are, of course, concerned with environmental sustainability, climate change, but there is also the social aspect that we are very much concerned about. We have to worry about the welfare of our people. Now, to what extent do we balance environmental sustainability with social sustainability? Sometimes there could be they might move in different directions. For example, we can use cheaper coal because that's what's available in the country rather than importing high calorific value coal. That will, but with the new carbon coal power projects, there are new technologies that will control the emission, but there might be some emission. But that will make power available at a more affordable rate, to the local population, particularly the poor. Now, how do you balance that? That's something that has to be looked into as well.
And that requires an international framework or to be able to achieve those things?
Yeah, I guess so. We need to get buy-in by all other countries, because we are together in Paris. There's a Paris Agreement, there's a Kyoto Protocol, we're all together. But this is from my own viewpoint, that we might need to also throw in the issue of social sustainability.
Irene, what do you think about the difficulty or challenges matching up the EU's approach with that at an international level on transparency? Should the EU be kind of willing to maybe rein in its ambitions to get to kind of an agreement at the ISSB, or should it work the other way around?
Well, it's a very interesting debate, and I understand, the need of the industry, especially the global, those who operate on a global basis, to have international standards that are aligned. But I think that if we are where we are now, it's because the European Union took the initiative and took the leadership and decided, we've been talking about this long enough. I think it's time to act. I know that regulation is not nice. I know that many, people don't like being regulated. It requires time and efforts and money to comply, to adjust, to change the processes. I know that. But when you have emergencies like the one we are facing regarding climate change, someone has to start eventually. And I'm glad and proud that the European Union was the one who took the lead on this one. Now, I know that now that we've put this in motion, it's good to see that other jurisdictions are moving as well, that other international bodies are, scaling up their efforts. What should we be doing now? Well, I don't think we now can, curb or lower our ambitions too much. And especially, you've mentioned, I've heard maybe Stephen mentioned the double materiality principle. And I understand this is an important point, and we can try to see and negotiate. But the double materiality principle has something. It's not just a bureaucratic or philosophical approach. It has practical implications also on emissions reduction, for example, because whether you view and measure only the outside in, the external impact on the financial performance of the firm alone, or if you incorporate that also the impact of the firm on the environment, you can see that has a very different implications in very practical terms in what you measure and what your, objectives and targets and ambitions can be. So I think of course, there is I think the willingness to make things, and we know that when we operate at an international level, we can have globally a bigger impact. But if we lower too much our ambitions, we've done it in other fields. Now I don't want to change topic, but if you look, for example, at what we are doing, what we have been doing on the global taxation reforms, we have adjusted our ambitions in trying to achieving an international agreement because we knew that we needed a broader agreement. But we always have to be very careful, especially when it entails something so important like emission reductions and climate change, not to water down too much the ambition. So I think it's an important debate. I think it's good that we talk about it, that now everybody's on the, at the same table and trying to achieve, but we have to be a little bit careful. One last thing, I will be really short, because when Matthias said exporting innovation is more important than exporting regulation, I think it's a very interesting, provocative, but I tend to agree that in some cases, innovation itself is a little bit pushed by regulation. So, and what Europe is doing is not just exporting regulation, and I think in terms of, or taxonomy, but we are our Green New Deal strategy really is very broad and encompasses regulation that are pushing innovation in many fields. So automobile, forest, land use. So we have a bunch of regulation that we are have put in place. I don't know what happened to the light here. That are supposed to push innovation in different sectors to make sure that in each sector you are creating incentives to develop innovations that will make those sectors more efficient in terms of energy consumption and in terms of emission reduction. So we hope that this very broad approach can have a deep impact on the environment and in the objectives that we want to achieve.
So, Mario, maybe coming back to the point about transition as well and exporting that innovation, do insurers need this extra double materiality information from companies? How does that affect your investment portfolios? Are you already kind of shifting? And also, what about underwriting? How is it affecting your approach?
Yes. So the simple answer is yes. So we do need this information. On underwriting, I think we have already moved away from a number of clearly damaging industries and activities. The approach we have taken in our organization is to continue discussing with the customers about having a strong sustainability pattern over the next years. If they do have it, we will maintain our underwriting support to them. If we find that they don't have it, then we decide to walk away from them. We think that a clear-cut strategy, as some of NGOs are asking us, is not fair to the customers, because the reconversion of some activities and of some energy sources into renewables and into alternatives takes time. And if we see customers committed in a fair and transparent way to achieve it, we'll keep supporting them over time. But there's data, especially on Scope 3, they're still badly needed, and they should be, and they come available progressively, but we don't know enough yet today.
Stephen, do you agree with that for banks? I mean, Mario mentioned exclusions there. Are banks considering exclusions in the same way?
Well, I mean, look, we start with inclusion, like I said before. By the way, going back to what Irene said, I'm in favor of double materiality. It's also a matter of about being right or getting right, I guess. But anyway, and by the way, good on you for saving energy in the meantime. So that's well done. Yeah, look, I mean, we of course start with inclusion, and here's the dilemma, of course, because the question is, how long can you be inclusive before you get exclusive? And that's where I do think regulation can help, because regulation then sets a standard at what level we all need to be if we want to transition to minus 45% globally by 2030, and of course at net zero by 2050, and the transition pathways of the international energy agencies per sector, because that gives direction to where we want to be. Now it comes to individual companies, and I think that's the dilemma that we have as well. We measure and are able to measure increasingly well what our exposure per sector is. Not perfect, but we're getting there. We now have, I think, 75% of our exposure of our lending book is now in scope, and the remaining part we hope to do next year. And of course, standards will then evolve, I guess, but that's the world we're living in. But to actually have a conversation with your individual client, how that individual loan adds or decreases to the CO2 footprint that we have, and whether we therefore grant a loan or not, is currently in our system still quite difficult. And so what we need to, and we hope to get that in 2023, but only then you can have a real discussion with your customers in terms of, look, we want to decrease the exposure in this sector by so much by that date. It basically means that if we add you to our exposure, it means this. And then at least we can have a conversation with clients to compare them to other clients in that particular sector. Now, what that needs is to have better data also from participants in the sector, so to be able, we can compare them fairly. Otherwise, we're talking at sort of a higher hemisphere level, but nobody really knows what we're talking about. I think that's currently the phase in which we are in. Secondly, on the positive side, that better data then also helps to avoid greenwashing, because if we then propose a certain product, it also is then a product that is being accepted by being a good green product, other than maybe being perceived skeptically as a greenwashing product. So I think the next step is that we move from reporting and measurement to actually driving the impact. And I think that we're in the midst of that transition.
Can you do that with what's on the table at the moment in terms of the data and the reporting, or do you need more stringent information from companies, say, with transition plans or enforced transition plans?
Since we're in transition, the answer cannot be yes, I guess. But so partially we can, but it's not granular and not consistent enough. So for some sectors, we have enough, like for the energy sector, who have already started earlier with collecting data, but we see that in a lot of industries happening now. We can have good conversations, especially with large companies who are typically, but I generalize, a bit further in their reporting, but it is more difficult for other sectors, and it is more difficult sometimes for smaller companies who do not have that information. And especially also if you look, for example, at their mortgage portfolio, we use proxies. We don't use actual emissions per household, we use proxies. And it will always have its limitations. Now, of course, perfect is the enemy of good. So I think that one of the speakers already said that. Let's try to get to some consistency so we can move forward together. But I think that we need to continue to work on that, because then we have better conversations with our clients and then we can have real impact. And let me make one further remark and then I will stop, is that if we make investments, it's about risk management but also about transition planning. But when we make investments, the hardest part is the hard to abate sectors. And that is something that banks cannot do alone, because there's a lot of equity involved there. And as you all know, the requirements on equity, on equity financing for banks are onerous for all the right reasons. But it also means that we need collaboration with governments or supranationals to actually bridge that gap. Otherwise, it's very hard to actually transition, and then it will become exclusive rather than inclusive, and I would be very mindful of not doing that.
Matthias, are you coming under more pressure from people like Stephen and Mario to give more information?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Stephen, we had quite robust conversations about whether or not to invest in Bayer and participate in bonds. That means the invisible hand of the market not only turns green, sometimes actually it forms a fist. Yeah, so it's quite challenging to operate in that environment. The decarbonization, apart from the targets, has three fields. It has this field of, can we reduce emissions? Can we remove carbon out of the atmosphere? And can we increase the resilience of communities? And the Philippines is a great example. So as a country that hardly has contributed to the problem, faces extreme storms, has to invest money that should go into education to pay like sky-high prices for fertilizers, does not have the kind of support that the just transition demands. And what I find interesting in the reporting space is that one area is completely underutilized, and that is the R&D budgets of companies. There you have full transparency on the future these companies are trying to invent. And my hint also in the direction of insurance, of banking, also in the direction of regulators is focus more on how companies spend their money in R&D. Are the investments increasing resilience? Is there a potential to remove carbon emissions? Are we reducing the footprint of our operations with how we do R&D? I think is one of the most important questions companies like Bayer that actually produce stuff have to answer. And it's not an easy task. So we have a €2.5 billion R&D budget for agriculture. Agriculture is a quarter of all carbon emissions. are we investing this money wisely? Obviously, we need to invest it in something where we get something back, but are we increasing the carbon emissions of agriculture or reducing it? That's the kind of question we would like to answer in the conversations. Also, of course, when we are applying for Stephen's, for example, Stephen's support to kind of lend us money to be even faster with our transition.
And to Stephen's point about the government, to do that process, is there too much focus on the private sector? Should there be more government kind of, if you're looking at your agriculture development, do you need the government there as well?
Well, I need regulation that drives innovation. So again, European Union, if the regulation goes in a direction that drives innovation, I'm super happy with it. So, for example, okay, we eat up some of the more difficult regulation on reporting and so on, but we finally in Europe get to a regulatory framework that makes gene editing innovation possible. These are the kind of deals that would balance carrots and sticks. And I think that's what I would like to see also from the political side, really giving us the opportunity and the freedom to innovate in the direction that actually makes decarbonization possible.
Fred, do you agree with that? Do you think there's enough innovation?
Yeah, very much so. We have seen other situations in the past where regulations ended up in a box-ticking exercise to measure compliance. But actually what we need to see is performance. And for performance to happen, you need to get the innovation that will drive performance towards greater heights. So regulations are important, but it should not stop there. I agree. We need to go beyond. We need to go from compliance to performance. And performance, that's where R&D comes in. That's where innovation that comes out of R&D becomes useful.
Because that's the question really, Irene, as well, isn't it? How much of this is actually shifting versus bringing more transparency versus like prompting an actual shift? Oh, you're on mute. Okay, we'll come back to you in a second. Mario, did you want to come in on that?
No, I was just confirming to Irene that we can hear her.
Oh, we can't hear you on the stage. Maybe try again now?
You cannot hear me on the stage?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so we are at the still at a quite early stage. As we were saying, we are, still trying to put in motion and to also refine and calibrate. I understand it's not, we have put in place a lot of obligations, requirements, regulations. We have disclosure obligations on different types of companies, on different content, different point in times, through different channels. So it's true we will have to recalibrate, and I know we will have also to double our effort to align with more international standards. So I think maybe we need a little bit time to see how all of this will be implemented and how we will, achieve the performance that the minister mentioned. And I completely agree that our objective is not regulation in itself. I mean, regulation has to have an objective in terms of performance, decarbonization, and achieving our targets. Otherwise, it's completely useless. So it's not that we have fun just producing regulation or sitting like 15 hours to negotiate a regulation just for the sake of it. So we hope we do it because we hope to achieve concrete results. So we will make an effort to make that happen. And on this regard, talking about negotiations, I wanted to reply quickly because to the request for more data from companies and firms to also support the work of bank, insurers, and financial services. And we totally agree, and that's why we worked on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which maybe Matthias didn't love, I don't know, because I know it puts a lot of obligation, but the negotiations were concluded in June. It will soon be adopted, enter into force, and I think this will be key, because with the development of these standardized reporting requirements, this regulation, this directive will produce important amounts of comparable, machine-readable data from the majority of companies in the Union. And all the data reported will be also, assured through a requirement to obtain audits. So we are also, pushing at creating a new market for green reviews. So we are trying to enhance and create a real market also in terms of data, information available from the companies, and we try to be as inclusive as possible. And as you can imagine, we had a lot of pressures from SMEs, but the SMEs are included. Of course, there are lighter reporting requirements, and there is an opt-out, but only temporarily until 28, because we wanted to be as inclusive as possible, because we know, as Stephen was saying, that we can't make exclusion. We have to try to be inclusive, and especially with the SMEs, we need to find a way to keep them on board the ecological transition. Otherwise, if you just exempt them, you just lose them on the way. But instead, we need to make this transition relevant and working for all firms of all sizes. Otherwise, we are not going to win this battle. So we try to respond. Of course, it's a fast changing world and reality, and there are lots of things to be addressed. We try to do it in a fast and effective way, but we are also always willing to review, change, adapt, discuss opportunities like this, where we talk with banks and firms are, of course, very, very helpful. But believe me, we are trying to, all the regulations that we do with some concrete and positive objectives in mind.
And we're coming towards the end of the panel, but if I could also just ask you, Irene, quickly, we are in a different backdrop at the moment with rising inflation, interest rates, and the war in Ukraine. Is there still that urgency about this issue in Brussels, or are issues of energy security potentially slowing the transition as well?
I don't see these two objectives as in contradiction. All the contrary. I think they are very much aligned. If we had pushed more on, renewables and alternative sources of energy, we would be, like 20 years ago, we would be in a very different place today in terms of energy security. So actually, I see these objectives as very much aligned, and I don't see lowering the interest or the pressure to move forward towards sustainable and green economy and finance. All the contrary. I think we have to push even more in light of the energy security problems that we have.
Does anyone else think the energy security might delay the transition or make it more difficult to make these investments?
I think what could happen is, given the high energy prices and the high input prices for something like natural gas, is that Europe loses key strategic sectors to countries that are not as politically willing to decarbonize. That's a real risk. And in practical terms, our distant cousins, BASF, up the River Rhine, just made an announcement in recent days to kind of rebuild the largest chemicals factory in the world, currently in Germany, in China. That's a really big deal, and that's not just a threat, that's actually a decision being taken. So we have to take that into account. We have to make sure that there is a competitive industry in Europe that actually can do the job.
Is that a problem on the financing side, Stephen and Mario as well, thinking about those decisions going forward?
It's a dilemma. In terms of we have pledged that we would not finance new oil and gas fields. And already in 2017 we said that we would gradually, until 2025, and we're on our way, not finance new coal-fired power plants anymore, and we are gradually decreasing that exposure. And I think that's the there's two challenges that go hand in hand. What I would advocate is that we should avoid, and I of course understand that the war is terrible and it has also a secondary impact on Europe as well. What we should avoid is using that to fall back into our previous ways, and I would say even stronger now put the effort is, how can we decrease dependency on fossil fuels? Because there is a risk that we say, yeah, but now it doesn't work. Here I say it, there's always an excuse not to do it, and we need to continue to push through. Secondly, it does mean, for example, on a number of these new technologies, we need, or for example, in the supply chain where some companies that need a transition can't do it by themselves because the singular investment for them is too big to do it by themselves, it sits elsewhere in the sector, we shouldn't underestimate those complexities. And so we have been trying to finance, and now it's coming on stream gradually, but for years we have been trying to find hydrogen or battery projects. It was very hard to find. Only now it's gradually coming. But we need to see, and all these projects are quite bespoke, so that's why I'm urging to work with each other to find solutions, because sometimes, especially the more difficult sectors, we need to work together to push it through, otherwise we run a higher risk to fall back.
Okay. Mario, did you want to come in quickly, because we're over time?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly. I think now we have a great opportunity to push forward strongly on renewable and alternative energies. If we miss it and instead we go back to coal and to gas extraction and we create more fossil fuels, yeah, I mean, we're victim of ourselves and we make a huge mistake. So I see this as a great opportunity, and I fully agree that if we had been doing this 20 years ago, we would not find ourselves in this situation where we are today. Can I just repeat my argument that we need also prices to convey the right information to the customers and to the companies? They don't work today. They must be working because we need price support. We need to find that the customers and the companies do reading the prices what are the right things to do. And that's not happening. And honestly, I don't see any political support for making this happening anywhere in the world. And I believe that this is a big obstacle to progress quickly towards a more sustainable planet.
Okay, so ending with a difficulty, perhaps. But just to wrap up very quickly, what will you all pledge to do in the next 12 months to make the green transition happen? As you saw, the Commission is holding people to account on that, so you might get brought back up next year in what you say now. If I start with Matthias, then.
Yeah, first of all, we will double down on climate action. The climate doesn't care about Putin. Yeah, doesn't really care about him. Putin doesn't know that, but everybody else does. We will have at least half of our electricity from renewable sources globally, and contracts in place by mid of this decade to have 2/3 of green energy. We will establish with the food value chain a very clear model for carbon farming in Europe that will allow farmers to actually benefit from reducing and removing carbon emissions. And thirdly, we will have a business plan in place to disrupt the current fertilizer production and to come with innovative biological solutions.
Okay, and in a quick tour de table, Fred, what would you say?
Well, I just would like to say that while the Philippines has a small portion of the carbon footprint in the world, we're industrializing, and we are attracting industries that will participate in global value chains in various industries. So we'll be very much conscious of developments in regulation in Europe, for European companies, US, for American companies, and other nationalities. And internally, we're doing our part in addressing the high cost of power right now. We are very dependent on petroleum products, but we're implementing a lot of renewables, and that will be happening within the 12 months, including solar on the surface of lakes and wind on shorelines.
Stephen and Mario, 12 months, what will you do?
Three things. So first of all, we have a target to engage 125 billion per annum as per 2025. We're currently at 90 billion per annum. So we have targets in place to move towards that level. That's for the outside world. Two, we have our own footprint, there where we have set a target to decrease, although we are net neutral. Net neutral sounds nice, but we also want to get to net zero in our own operations. So we have a target of minus 75% per 2025. We are now at minus 40%, so we need to set the next step to get to that minus 75%. And thirdly, it's also about our people in ING. Many people are engaged, but also many people need to be trained. And we have a program in place to train and engage the majority of our people, which is in total 65,000 people we have in our firm, internally and externally, so that they are being engaged and trained next year. Those are the three pledges that we make.
Mario?
Yeah, on top of our existing target for 2025, we're running ahead of them, and so we're very confident that we will reach them. We want to add two more targets. We want to reach 1 billion of unit-linked funds invested in sustainable products, and we want to reach 5% of our invested assets in impact investments. Today, unit-linked is roughly 200 million, so it's 5 times more by 25. And for the impact investments today, they're roughly 3% of our invested assets. So it's short of doubling it by 25.
And Irene, I guess we've got some more regulation to come from Brussels in the next 12 months.
Don't ask her.
Okay, that's our core business. So that's what we do. And but I think we have two things so my pledge is to conclude our negotiations on two important things. One is the regulation on the European Green Bond Standards, because I think that's very important. So we are now in the negotiations. There are challenges, but my pledge is that we will finish and conclude hopefully by the end of this year. And then the Repower EU. I mean, we have to conclude Repower EU and, have additional resources to support the transition. I think that's crucial. That's very important. We voted on Tuesday in the committee. It's still a long way. It has to go to plenary, has to go into interinstitutional negotiations, and then it has to reach the member states. We need to do it fast, and we need member states to use it. We need member states to put in place plans, investments to make it work as fast as possible.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you for the audience for bearing with us as we keep you from coffee. But I think that was a really interesting discussion, some challenges as well as some opportunities there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much to all the speakers and to Hannah. We're going to head for a quick break now, but do stay with us online. Use the hashtag InvestGreenEU. Go on slide to ask your questions and comments. We're going to get back straight to that just after a quick break. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great break here, and we're going to continue our EU Sustainable Investment Summit here in Brussels. Now I'm going to invite all of you to go on your social media and to use the hashtag InvestGreenEU. You can also see it all over the stage here, and also to go on Slido to make your comments and to ask your questions, because we're going to get ready for the next session. But before that, we have the keynote address by Senator Thornton Farrell, Australian Minister for Trade and Tourism.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address this year's EU Sustainable Investment Summit. While I cannot be in Brussels personally, I was pleased to be invited to deliver this message outlining some of the energy challenges we all face and the steps the Australian Government is taking to provide clean, secure and affordable energy for the future. Let me start by noting that Australia condemns Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine, which violates the most fundamental norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity Australia has worked on with our partners to support Ukraine and hold Russia to account for its actions. Russia's war is causing immense human suffering and has exacerbated the global crisis in food and energy security. We're all part of the global energy market, and the impact of the war on energy supplies globally and electricity and gas prices for consumers and businesses is felt by all. We understand this is a key challenge for Europe as it heads into winter. Constraints on global energy supply have highlighted the crucial need to diversify supplies, boost energy efficiency and make energy systems more resilient to external shocks. And this comes on top of the urgent need to reduce emissions and decarbonise economies. I know the European Union has been taking decisive action to address these challenges through its Fit for 55 package of climate initiatives and its Repower EU plan, and we appreciate objectives of the European Green Deal as you make the transition to a sustainable economy. Despite being a major energy exporter with tremendous potential in renewables, our challenges here in Australia are not so dissimilar. We've had to address a series of challenges to the stability of gas supplies to our East Coast energy market, and we've had to contend with intensifying climate change impacts both here and across our region. We've had floods, we've had wildfires and heat waves, and there is observable damage in our iconic Great Barrier Reef. These challenges are front and centre for us, and for these reasons the Australian Government is taking ambitious action on climate change and putting in place a suite of new policies that will ensure secure and affordable energy supplies. We've had a new ambitious 2030 target to reduce greenhouse emissions by 43% below 2005 levels, putting us on track to achieve our net zero emissions target by 2050. And in June, we lodged the new 2030 target and reaffirmed the 2050 target as our updated nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. And in September, we enshrined these commitments in binding legislation. Our new 2030 target is ambitious, but it's also achievable and is a responsible contribution to global efforts to keep 1.5 degree warming within reach. We are putting in place new policies as part of Powering Australia's strategy to decarbonise energy supplies and bring us into alignment with our key trading partners. As part of the strategy, we're investing $20 billion to upgrade the electricity grid to support more renewables and installing community batteries and the solar banks to ensure more households can benefit from the rooftop solar and cheaper electricity. We're investing in green hydrogen to support decarbonisation in hard-to-abate sectors, including steel, glass, cement and heavy land and maritime transport. Australia's emerging hydrogen industry has an estimated $185 billion pipeline of clean hydrogen projects. This includes the Uri project in Western Australia's Pilbara region, which just a few weeks ago reached final investment decision. I'm proud to say there are a range of innovative local and international enterprises that are making quantum leaps in low emissions technology here in Australia. Let me mention just a couple of exciting developments. The Asian Renewable Energy Hub, based in the remote Pilbara region of Western Australia, will provide renewable power to the local mining industry and produce green hydrogen and green ammonia for both domestic use and export. The hub will be built in stages, very large-scale onshore wind and solar to generate up to 26 gigawatts of green power, with the potential to produce 1.6 million tonnes of green hydrogen each year. Meanwhile, Australian company Sun Cable is progressing a project to build what could be the world's largest solar farm in Australia's Northern Territory, and a 4,200 kilometre undersea cable to provide renewable electricity to Singapore.
And next, for the introduction to the second session of the day, I'm inviting here on stage Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni. Please, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. Good morning, and welcome to this second session, addressing maybe the key issues of these months. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying that everything is energy. And without straying into the world of physics, we can certainly say that all sectors of our economies are more or less dependent on energy. That's why any discussion about building tomorrow must also focus on the kind of energy system we want for the future, especially at a time of crisis like today. Clean, secure, and affordable. These are the goals of our energy policy in the EU. In recent years, with cheap and abundant energy flowing, the emphasis was, by and large, on how to green our economies in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals at the end of this decade. We launched, at the beginning of this Commission mandate, the European Green Deal with ambitious targets to curb emissions. And we put the green transition at the heart of Next Generation EU, our plan for the recovery after the pandemic. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the shockwaves from Russia's war have driven energy prices to unprecedented and unsustainable levels, fueling high inflation and pushing our economies to the brink of recession. The IMF latest World Economic Outlook expects global growth to slow down to one of its lowest levels in 2 decades, and also the European economy will enter a difficult phase. These developments are challenging our social cohesion, not only our economic figures. Many households and businesses are facing choices they never should have to face. Reducing demand, securing sufficient supplies for the winters ahead, and keeping prices under control have therefore taken center stage in the EU. And I think we are making important progress. In just a few months, we diversified supplies and made in a big measure and made up for the reduced imports from Russia. Gas storage for this winter is, as you know, more than 90%. And we also took significant steps to lower energy consumption, strengthen joint gas purchasing, and capture the extraordinary profits in the energy sector. And further steps are still necessary, as we all know. The urgency of addressing questions of energy security and affordability is so undeniable. But it also carries the risk that in a bid to secure plentiful energy at lower prices, we look for solutions that delay the green transition. This is the dilemma. And it is a risk not just in Europe, but also around the world, and in particular in countries where budgetary capacity to invest in renewables is more limited. We must absolutely avoid this mistake. The green transition needs to be accelerated, not delayed. The plan that we call Repower EU puts forward important measures to speed up investments in renewables and energy efficiency. These investments are crucial for lowering fossil fuel consumption, increasing energy savings, and thereby enhancing our energy security. However, these measures also come with a significant price tag. To deliver on the green transition will require additional investments of more than €500 billion, €500 billion every year for the next few years, according to our estimate. Plugging this gap will only be possible if we mobilize both public and private finance. The Commission will soon come forward with proposals to increase the firepower of Repower EU and to review the EU fiscal rules to ensure that national budgets better support these investments. We have also delivered on our pledge to launch the InvestEU programme to mobilise private investments. It was the former Juncker plan, as you may remember. Sustainable investment projects are now being realised throughout the EU, and by next year we plan to have InvestEU agreements with all the national institutions that have applied for the EU support, thus increasing sustainable investment with a strong local focus. We have also made progress on last year's pledge to develop a comprehensive set of statistics on the European Green Deal. Eurostat started disseminating quarterly estimates of greenhouse gas emissions and released a dashboard of statistical indicators relevant for the green transition. And we are now working on a review of the monitoring framework for the circular economy to be published at the beginning of next year. And lastly, we are working on SDG goals in the EU context in relation with the United Nations initiative and with our European semester. So, with our policies, we try to face the challenges of this global energy crisis. We are working to protect our most vulnerable citizens and firms while moving forward with our green ambitions. At the same time, we are committed to step up international cooperation to catalyse green investments. And as we get ready for COP27, Europe must continue to lead the way to show that a clean, secure and affordable energy future for all is possible. Thank you.
Paolo Gentiloni, thank you so much for this introduction. And next we have the pre-recorded keynote address by Omar Paganini, Minister of Industry, Energy and Mining from Uruguay.
I would like to start thanking the organizers of this event. We believe that the situation of the world regarding the energy sector is specifically a problem that we should all think about and have a strategic long-term vision. And from the side of Uruguay, we have a long-term relationship with the European Union we value very much. Last week, we had the visit of Josep Borrell, and there was a very promising event regarding European investment in Uruguay in the energy sectors, in the clean and green tech sectors, that was very successful. So it's a good opportunity to continue with this subject and discuss with the audience the opportunities we have and the problems we face as a global society, and specifically in the relationship of Uruguay and Europe. Maybe you're not aware, but Uruguay has carried on the first energy transition starting in 2010 with an agreement of all the political parties that had parliamentary representation at the time. And this transition achieved the independence of fossil fuels and the electricity generation. That is, Uruguay today has an electricity generation matrix that is 97% renewable in an average. Fossil fuels are only used to back up in specific moments and when there is a drought, because we depend 40%, 45% on hydropower, 36% on wind power, 20% on biomass, some 1-2% on photovoltaic, solar power, and the rest can be fossil fuel burning plants. But this transition, which was very successful and also achieved to take electricity to all the country, 99.9% of the country is covered by our electricity grid, has also put forward an aggressive policy on efficiency. Uruguay has achieved to grow economically without growing at the same rate in the energy consumption. So we are very happy to be in this stage now. We are one of the few countries in the world that have such high participation of renewables in the electricity generation. And we have to look at the rest of the energy matrix. We still depend 38-40% on fossil fuels, mainly for transportation and industry. So this is the second transition we are facing now, and it is based on two pillars. In the first place, we are fostering and driving electromobility with different policies. We have taken taxes out of the car import tax and for electric vehicles, and also specific taxes that are paid on new cars are not paid on electric vehicles and are very low for hybrid vehicles. At the same time, we are using the public transportation subsidy to foster and to drive the penetration of electric buses on our public transportation fleets. And this is all the electromobility package which is in place and is gaining momentum. At the same time, for decarbonizing the more difficult areas of freight transportation and maritime transportation, we started drafting our green hydrogen policy, and we discovered there was an important opportunity of cooperation with Europe in this sense. Uruguay has much more renewable source potential to generate renewable electricity that it will need for its own growth. And the scale of green hydrogen projects has to be rather big, so we are convinced that the feasibility of green hydrogen in Uruguay is tied to the capability to export green hydrogen or derivatives to other markets such as Europe. In that sense, we have been working with the government of Germany, with the European Union, with the Port of Rotterdam, with the Port of Hamburg, to understand and to study the feasibility of exporting green hydrogen derivatives and green hydrogen to Europe. And we are well advanced in this sense. We have our own green hydrogen roadmap for the country that you can find on the web. And we are moving forward in this direction very aggressively. Happily also, we are receiving quite a few companies, European companies, interested in investing in Uruguay for green hydrogen projects. And well, I will try to tell you a little bit about our green hydrogen roadmap. It started in 2021 with the call for pilot projects in green hydrogen and the development of a study by McKinsey to support our roadmap, and it has been published in 2022 and is being consulted all the political parties. Our green hydrogen roadmap aims in the short term to receive private investment for green methanol or ammonia projects, to develop these capabilities using new additional renewable electricity that will generate green hydrogen and will use biogenic CO2 that we have from our biomass sector to produce green methanol, to produce new green fuels. We already have a project that has gone through the first feasibility studies and has celebrated its public audiences in the interior of the country, and we are already receiving other interested projects in investing. Uruguay has a very good complementation of solar power and wind power that can achieve electrolyzers with a good utilization factor, and these new renewable plants have to be installed in the center north of the country, where there is very low population density and very good sun and wind resources. So this is moving forward, and we think that in 2025 we will have already under construction the first green methanol projects. The logistics is not an issue. We have train transportation of green methanol to the port of Montevideo, a deep water port in the Atlantic. We also can transport over the river Uruguay using barges. So what we need is to secure the off-taking of these projects, and some of them are being presented to the H2 Global Foundation of the German society, and we hopefully will get some of the support from that part, and others are private projects. The government of Uruguay is giving tax breaks, is giving support in how to carry out all the permitting of these projects and getting them quickly on their way. But we need private investment, and we need, of course, a market to be developed on the world, and specifically in Europe. We think there's a very big opportunity. So, just to end up the remarks, the world has to go through a very big energy transition. It has to take into account all the difficulties that this makes, the chicken and egg problem that has to be solved by the way of long-term contracts that can support off-taking. It has to take into account also how these projects affect the economy and the environment of all the countries. We are happy to say that in Uruguay we have a very good sustainable production situation, and these projects will not affect the environment in any way. We have very low population density in the north. We have a lot of resources we can use without affecting our local production, and we have water, sweet water in very large quantities. So we are very keen on participating on this transformation and to be a partner of Europe in this clean energy route we all have to take together. The world needs to decarbonize, and it also needs to diversify the energy resources. So we are sure this is a way to go, and we are happy to be on this direction. Thank you very much.
And without further ado, let's go straight to the second session. I'm passing the word to the moderator, Sam Fleming, Brussels Bureau Chief at the Financial Times.
Thanks very much indeed, Sasha. Great to be here. About a year and a half ago or so, the plan seemed pretty clear, didn't it? It was Fit for 55, align the sectoral laws of the 2030 targets, and then set course for climate neutrality in 2050. Enormously challenging, but there was a plan. And then, obviously, events have intervened. We've had war in Europe. We've had an enormous energy crisis across Europe. And now we've had also a scramble for fossil fuels to shore up security of supply. So can we stay on track for those climate goals. We have a superb panel to discuss this. Let me introduce them to you. First, on my left is Monique Goyand, who is the Director General of BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. Alongside her is Mark Bowman, who's the Vice President for Policy and Partnerships at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London, and Alberto Di Paoli, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Enel, the international Italian energy utility. Also joining us, hopefully via video link, will be Teresa Ribera, the Spanish Minister for Ecological Transition. Great to see you, Minister. And we also have joining us Yinka Babalola, who's a Special Advisor for Fiscal Policy in Nigeria and who's kindly standing in for Zainab Ahmed, the Finance Minister of Nigeria, who has been unable to join us. Let me kick things off. I'm going to ask Minister Ribera first, if I could. About a year ago, probably more than a year ago now, Spain was sounding the alarm about the high energy prices, in particular the close link between gas prices and electricity prices and the threat this posed to the economy. Since then, as I said, we've had a lot of developments indeed. I wonder if you could just take us a step back for us and assess where Europe stands now in terms of its energy situation, and how concerned are you about the stresses in the energy markets today? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss on such an important issue. Yes, it's true that we sounded the alarm because the way our customers, both families, households and industry, used to contract their energy made us being in the very first row of the impact of this high volatility on gas prices and its impact on electricity. And the first message was, we have a problem with gas prices, but we should not be allowing that this pollutes the electricity prices. We need to electrify, we need to be much more effective. The price signal will still be there, but we need to accommodate this transition in a manner that it is affordable, secure and affordable and environmentally sound, as the Commissioner was saying. And what we learned later on was that, of course, we needed to be flexible for those countries that were having a huge problem, not only on prices, but also on the factual access to the energy goods, and we needed to be solider. But at the same time, the lesson was so clear. The horrible and cruel invasion and the use of the energy as a weapon by Putin was showing to what extent we needed to transform and to anticipate and accelerate the decarbonization process. So the whole assessment and the strategic vision in the mid and long term should remain with all of us. This is why I think that the Fit for 55 and ensuring the acceleration of the transformation is so key. Of course, we may need some additional flexibility in the very short term because of the security of supply reasons in many countries. But we need to do it at the same time that we accelerate the transformation. And this means paying attention to many different aspects. I think that we are witnessing not only the horrible impacts in terms of environment that were the reasons why we started this revolution, but the social and economic impact of not doing that. We cannot allow ourselves to increase the energy poverty rates the other way around. We need to reduce them, and we cannot allow ourselves to consume less because of a huge destruction of the demand coming from the industrial sectors. This is why we need to combine the acceleration of the transformation, the social measures to come along with the people and the industry, paying attention to the most vulnerable industry, and the changes in the regulation that provide extraordinary or temporary measures that can facilitate to go along this conflictual short-term period. And this is what we are trying to do, promote efficiency so that we learn to produce and consume energy in a different manner, to produce the electrification and the renewable energy solutions, and to be sure that we can play with different drivers and avoid getting trapped in a kind of green trap where those that are more vulnerable are the last ones to benefit from the transformation. We need to ensure that very small-scale initiatives can play the role. The solar rooftops, as commented by the minister from Australia, are absolutely key. The small energy communities, the small plants can benefit the consumers since the very first moment, but at the same time we need the big players investing their money and counting on a regulatory context that facilitates this taking place, combining different measures and thinking at the regional scale and not only at the local scale, taking also into consideration that we need to strengthen the relationship with all the other players, all the other partners in different places of the world. The world is much more smaller than the size we used to think of.
Thanks, Minister. I'm also aware you need to leave us in about 10 minutes, so I will try and get back to you once before you have to leave. I'm going to turn now to Alberto De Paoli. We have seen in recent days, if not weeks, quite substantial declines in gas prices, certainly way below where we were in August. How much confidence do you now feel in terms of the energy crisis situation that we face? And are you any more comfortable than you were, say, 2 months ago?
Yes, we have seen this price reduction, and I think it's also related to all the actions taken in Europe and in every country to soften the problem that we had during summer. Clearly, we are living now so we are entering a winter, and so we don't know what the climate condition will be because it's going to affect it a lot. So the prices we will see. I say. The very point I would stress is that right now, also thanks to the actions taken, we are living a price crisis. So we are living a crisis that the price of gas is inducing in the economy. And the price of gas is intrinsically volatile. Now is a peak for what we are seeing and for the war and everything. But this is intrinsically in this specific things of a fossil fuel in which we are now relying our economic development. So clearly, we may now say that a price that is 3 times what it was used to be in the past is good because now is 50, 60, 70% less what we saw during summer. But clearly, it's not the solution we are seeking for. This is a temporary solution, and reducing the gas price is the utmost important. But clearly, we have not to look at this reduction in prices as the way in which we have to address what we have to do. We have to push the transition forward, because we don't need to rely on fossil fuel and on the volatility of price. We need stable source of energy with a very, very low cost. Not volatile. And the very only way to do it with the technology available today, because clearly in the future we will have other technologies, and now we have to invest in the future technologies because the world will not stop at 2030 and 2040. This will be already here in 3000 and 4000 DC. But the technologies we have today are the technology we have to use for this and to push the transition. When I joined Enel 10 years ago, I was in another sector. I started with this strange new technology called wind that was producing energy at 300 euros megawatt hour versus the 90 of the gas. It was a joke, but a joke that every country in Europe and in the world subsidized a lot. And now we have energy that is produced at 40, 50 instead of 90 and now 500 of the gas. So that's why I think we have to look at this reduction because they are useful, and thanks to all the action of the governments taken in this period. But clearly it's not the solution of our problem. The solution is the energy transition.
Thanks. Monique Goyens, can I ask you, where are we at the moment? Has the EU, as we stand here, managed to stick with a coherent strategy for its climate goals? Or do you think this strategy has become unstuck, given the imperative of security of supply and the imperative of bringing down energy prices?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for allowing the consumer voice to be also heard here. First of all, I would have liked to reassure Commissioner Gentiloni, so somebody please tell him, from the consumer perspective, and we are in daily contact with people, and we ask them very often, the green transition should not be held, it should be accelerated. So people are with you. It's very important because sometimes the voices that are asking for flexibility or delay are not necessarily the people's voices, but vested interests. So that's important. So I think that I have a piece of good news to share you, because from the consumer perspective, we believe that what's happening for the moment is great, because if it's well designed, this push towards decarbonized energy or decarbonized markets, in fact, related with the fact that we need to secure our energy in another way than in the past, is also good for consumers. What we see is that investment in energy efficiency and investment in renewables, and we have done also economic research on that. At the end of the day, it will be less costly for the people. It will cost less. So energy efficiency and the focus on renewables is good for the environment. It's good for our wallets, but it's also good, and that is not sufficiently mentioned, for our health, because less pollution means less sick people, and healthcare budgets spend a lot of the revenues or of the budget available on fighting the consequences of air pollution. And finally, it even has a social dimension, because we have for the moment 50 million people in Europe that are energy poor. If you help them to live in homes that are energy efficient and that are being fueled by renewables, you bring their energy bill down. And if you get them out of energy poverty, you get them out of poverty, meaning that it's good for them, but it's also good for the social policy budgets. So in fact, it's a much broader win if we can really stick to this consistency of accelerating the energy transition and taking this shock that we are for the moment going through as an opportunity to be even bolder.
Let me turn to Yinka Babalola. I want to ask about Nigeria's own energy transition, but before I do, I wanted to start by asking about the contribution Nigeria is making to the social security supply in the European Union in particular. Obviously, Nigeria has the capacity to bridge some of the gap left by Russian gas. I wondered, how do you assess Nigeria's likely contribution to security supply, specifically in the EU? And do you see a coherent strategy by the EU in terms of its own energy needs right now?
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the European Commission for extending this invitation for Nigeria to participate at this summit, because I think it's very timely given the current challenging economic context as we count down to COP27. So in terms of Nigeria's contribution to securing energy supply for Europe, this kind of fits into our broader plan for energy transition. So Nigeria has an energy transition plan committed to carbon neutrality by 2016, which includes basically investing in gas as a transition towards our eventual goal of net zero emissions by 2016. So I know that talks have been held with representatives from the EU on Nigeria actually increasing its supplies to Europe. Unfortunately, I can't give you the specifics of that because that's handled by the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. But I can tell you that the energy transition plan that was launched in August this year by the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, essentially we're trying to raise 410 billion in incremental funding by 2016 to be able to achieve increasing our energy supplies. And that translates to an average of 10 billion per annum. And so in essence, given that in the recent past, Nigeria had faced difficulty in getting financing for large-scale gas projects, we actually welcome the interest in in everybody essentially investing in further gas supply. And that gives us an opportunity for Nigeria to actually come on stream and actually contribute to these supplies to supply external markets and to end energy poverty in Nigeria and also create jobs for the Nigerian population. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Bowman, over to you. The drive for security supply obviously has led to this dash for fossil fuels once again. the EBRD itself obviously is an investor in fossil fuels, and yet also wants to establish its green credentials and its response to the climate challenge. How are you tallying those, squaring those two in some ways contradictory goals?
I mean, thank you, Simon. Let me just start by very strongly agreeing with what other panellists have said, that the current context makes an incredibly strong case for accelerating the transition. Of course, governments across the world are focused on immediate security of supply issues, but in actual fact, there is an incredible alignment between climate, economic and energy security goals, and fundamentally what we've learned is that fossil fuels are dirty, they're expensive, and the supply is not reliable. So the EBRD is a transition bank. Climate is a very key objective for the bank. 50% of our investments are green investments, and our job is to help countries transition to net zero. We're absolutely focused on that, and we're working with a number of our countries, both supporting them deal with the short-term challenges, but doing so in a way that is consistent with the energy transition. And as I say, the case for acceleration of renewables is very clear. In terms of our approach on fossil fuels, we don't invest in coal. We don't invest in upstream gas. We have a very clear position on that. We will invest in gas projects where it is consistent with a transition to net zero, and obviously that depends on the country situation and the country specifics. But to give you an example of a project that we're currently working on, Kazakhstan, Almaty, heating there is provided by a very dirty, inefficient coal-powered station, massive CO2 emissions, lots of pollution. We are currently working on them on a project to transfer that from coal to gas. That will cut CO2 emissions by 50%. It will massively reduce pollution. But we will only do so consistent with our overall work with the authorities on their plans for transitioning the whole of the energy sector. So our job is to help the medium-term transition.
Let me ask Alberto De Paoli about the contribution of Enel itself. We had a report this week. We've got COP27 obviously coming up pretty soon. We had a report this week from the UN Environment Programme, which was incredibly worrying, really. It says the world is on track for a temperature rise of between 2.4 degrees centigrade and 2.6 degrees centigrade by 2100. Antonio Guterres said it's a catastrophe. The emissions gap is a byproduct of a commitments gap, a promises gap, and an action gap. Now, Enel itself obviously is very big in renewables, but that doesn't mean it's also not quite big in fossil fuels as well. To get rid of the fossil fuels, get rid of coal and so on, and give us a sense of your targets and whether you're on track.
Well, so we have stated in the last business plan that we presented, and we are going to all the components related to our economical wealth and our customers' economical wealth. And because of this, we have anticipated our target of zero emission, and I'm underlining not net zero emission, zero emission, in 2040, so 7 years from now. And it means that we want to have 100% of a electricity production from renewables at that year. And we will sell only renewable electricity to our customer base. We will stop selling gas. We will stop producing energy from gas plants and coal plants at that date. And we are not changing this date because of this energy crisis, because I agree with all the other panelists. It's only a way to push forward this kind of target. We have earmarked 200 billion euros of investments to reach in 2030 a midpoint. To reach 2040, we think that we have to double this measure and invest 400 million euros to reach the zero. And clearly, it is a massive change, but it's also a profitable one. I'm not saying an extra profitable one. It's a profitable one. It's the normal way in which company like us is seeking the investment phase and also the economical growth. On the other side, on the consumers, because all of us are paying for the 40% of fossil fuels that we bring on air. We pay for it. Only the efficiency of the electricity, the electrical vector, is inducing savings. Then other savings will be induced by the fact that producing this energy costs less. So it's the gigantic amount of saving that we are offering our customer base. To do this big amount of investments, clearly, companies like us need some important frameworks around, the frameworks that will offer the visibility of stable prices to invest. Now we are talking about a new market design. Is useful in new market design because the market design we have was designed when we had 100% of energy produced by gas plants. Now we have 30-40%. It is already in that way, and now the crisis is accelerating this need. But it's a need that the increase of renewables will trigger in the future. And on the other side, we need a huge support by the sustainable finance leg. There has to be not deterministic, not only one instrument, not only one way. Everything that is related to the transition in the financial world will have to be put at disposal of this big effort in the investments.
Inka Babalola, can I ask you about the financial side of things, the fiscal side of things? In particular, we're in a world now of rising financial strains because of high inflation and high borrowing costs. How is that impacting Nigeria's own financing and funding when it comes to the investment it needs to do to reach its own climate goals?
Thank you for that question. So obviously, Nigeria is definitely affected by what's happening in the global economy. Our fiscal space is more constrained than usual. And for that reason, we are looking to seek investment from private capital and also from non-concessional funds available from multilateral development banks. So essentially, we're considering like a mix of funds from various sources, and we believe that by tapping these sources, we're also able to draw on the technical assistance that tends to come with those funds, especially from multilateral development banks. So, like I said, right now, Nigeria's debt to GDP ratios are relatively low considering our level of development, but because of the constraint on our ability to raise revenues, our debt service to revenue ratios are pretty high, and for that reason, we are reluctant to take on additional debt to fund these investments. And this is why we are seeking private financing. So, for example, in the Energy Transition Plan, we've already begun to identify a pipeline of projects for funding. I think right now we're looking at about $23 billion of projects to be financed in the short term. And we've already started engaging with multilaterals and private investors to be able to access this funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Bowman, could I get a sense from you as you survey the many countries in which the EBRD is active? How is the strained situation in terms of borrowing costs for governments, sovereign borrowing costs? Indeed, also the impact of the rising dollar as well as another point of strain. How's that affecting countries' ability to stay on track with their investments in both securing energy supplies, but particularly in renewable energy supplies?
So clearly, countries across the region facing great strains, and the prices of gas and fossil fuels putting great strains on budgets. So for kind of very serious short-term issues in terms of guaranteeing security of supply. In terms of the energy transition, yes, there is the pressure on government budgets, but the real challenge is how to stimulate private investment, and that's that comes down to a number of factors, including getting the regulatory environment right and creating the conditions where investment in renewables can be bankable. And just to give you an example, it was mentioned earlier, but Egypt is chairing COP27. The EBRD has been involved in Egypt and renewables in Egypt for a number of years. We did a lot of work with them, helping them to get the right regulatory framework, so renewables became an investable proposition and could attract private finance. The government of Egypt is currently working on a plan. It makes the point that was made earlier about the case for accelerating the transition, but a plan to significantly increase renewable investment, 10 gigawatts of renewable energy, and decommissioning 5 gigawatts of dirty, inefficient gas power. That makes sense from so many different angles, from a climate angle, from an economic angle in terms of reducing pressure on the government finances, but also from an energy security angle. And with the surplus gas that they will have, they will be able to contribute to the EU's energy security by exporting it to Europe and earning some much-needed foreign exchange. So fundamentally, yes, there is very significant pressure on government finances, but the challenges with the transition is to create the conditions where private money can flow to support the energy transition.
Thanks. Monique Owens, can I ask you about this situation? We had a summit, obviously, a week or so ago here in the EU where member states committed to ideas like capping energy prices and so on. Do you think the response by policymakers in the EU in terms of actually alleviating some of the pressures on consumers has been strong enough? Where do you see particularly good responses by public sectors around the European Union to alleviating strains on consumers from high energy prices, and where do you think there needs to be more work?
Frankly speaking, from the consumer perspective, there has been an energy council or even a summit every second week, and we hear a lot of commitments, but we don't see what happens on the ground. So there is quite a gap between commitments and between how people are being relieved. Concerning any price gaps, I mean, there are examples, for example, in Denmark or in Czech Republic, where consumers are just being, let's say, billed the average amount of their bill in the previous years, and the difference is being taken by the government in charge and can be also maybe reimbursed. We have written a letter to the Commission where we have asked for the possibility to impose moratoria on energy bills, like it has been the case during the COVID crisis on mortgages. In order, moratoria is not a gift; it is a suspension of the payments in order to overcome the winter, and to connect that with a ban on sorry for the wordplay, with the ban on disconnections this winter. This is the type of signal that people who are in difficulty would like to see. However, I would like to say, for us, the emergency measures, yes, they need to be taken, but we also believe that there are some mistakes that are being made. Some member states, for example, first of all, what I would like to say, let's take a step back. I'm only speaking about residential consumers, and not industry investments. It's about, so we as people, you and I, we will need to change the way we consume energy. We will need to invest into renovating our house possibly, or into buying energy efficient appliances. And this is a responsibility that cannot just rest on our individual shoulders. It's just too big. There must be a systemic change, meaning that the sustainable option must be the default option for the people. They need help. It's not only about funding, access to green loans. It's still it's a hassle to get a green loan. I mean, a lot of talk about green mortgages, green loans. Try to find them on the market. They are not very favorable for consumers. Public subsidies, it's like a bureaucratic nightmare. So we not only would like support for the people in availability of funding that might really push them into energy investments, but also in assistance. It's a hassle to invest, and there is a jungle of bureaucratic and administrative provisions. There is the difficulty to know what is the right technology for your house. It's a difficulty to know, is that the right installer? They need trustworthy advice. And what we would propose, and you can do that very quickly at local level, have what we call one-stop shops, a place to go to, where you can be taken by the hand and somebody is really helping you through your journey into energy investments. And the mistake that I would like to refer to, if you allow me a minute more, for the moment, a lot of governments give out vouchers to households in order to, mitigate the energy bill. by the way, also to those households who don't need that help. That's already, I would say, rather give it to the energy, to the less affluent households, but also giving vouchers when you are living in a house that is not well renovated. It's a waste of money because you still are cold. And you still will, once the voucher will stop being given to you, you will still struggle with your energy bill. So at least part of that money could be dedicated to low-cost energy efficiency. You know, a tap on your window, insulating your water boiler. There are many, insulating your roof. It's something that you can do yourself even, or with the help of some friends maybe. And those low-hanging fruits are not being taken up by governments instead of giving the money away as a waste. They could help people to insulate a house at the short term.
Thanks. We're running relatively low on time, so I'm just going to try and get in a couple more questions before we wrap things up. Let me ask Alberto De Paoli. The summit I mentioned earlier also agreed that the EU member states should be working towards more joint procurement of gas. I wondered if you could give us an assessment from the point of view of the private sector as to whether you think joint procurement, a push for joint procurement is going to be a successful addition to the energy strategy in the EU.
Well, we see this achievement or this try has the other way to try to have a softening in what is the level of price of the gas in Europe that is trigger all the other prices in the energy. Also, what is going to be discussed around this cap on the gas is another way to work on reducing this price pressure. Also, because we know that when we have something physical that is happening in terms of shortage of gas, then you have another step that is out of the real physical and normal price tension that we may have with speculation, and that will come and trigger up all the prices. So all this stuff is useful. I think that it's useful to have an established way to have the transition fuel that will be more stable and available while, so we will trigger the transition we are talking about. I am fully in agreement with you and all the statement you gave. Clearly, I only want to stress one very point. We have to find the way in the utility, in the industry sector, and also in the consumers, that all the choices that we will do will be also an economical choice. So we have to find a way that every one of us will see an economical benefit in getting some kind of choices and changes. And I think technology that is available today already is offering this chance, because technology for the most of the transition is already available and is offering exactly the chance we are seeking for, out of saying that new technology is better than the past one. So if you drive an electric car, you'll never come back, because technologically speaking, it's superior. But it's not only this, this is offering also the economic benefit to then run into the transition.
Yinka Babalola, this is a question which actually requires probably a half an hour answer, but I only have a minute or so to ask it in. Nigeria itself obviously is a big producer in the fossil fuel industry, and yet also is trying to engage, as are other countries, in the transition towards a greener future. How has the public debate been affected by this realization of rapidly rising temperatures, but also ultimately a business model of Nigeria itself, which is clearly going to have to change?
Yeah, so I think I'd like to put it forward as Nigeria facing a conundrum. So on one hand, we're an energy poor country with large swaths of our population not having access to cheap and affordable energy. But at the same time, we are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change compared to more temperate regions of the country. So trying to balance those two things puts us in a very interesting public policy space. I think for most Nigerians, I think what's most important for them is to have access to cheap electricity, regardless of the source right now. That's the truth of the situation. But then, if we follow the news, we know that we had recent floods in Nigeria where our main rivers swelled beyond their normal size, and it has impacted many people with lives lost, with lots of people displaced from their homes. And so that also brings to the fore the need to address climate change. So that's something that we are trying to balance. It's not easy, but which is why we are now looking to gas, which is a less polluting fossil fuel in comparison to coal, to petrol, to diesel, as a transition path to net zero by 2060. Obviously, like I said before, we are looking for investments. If you can find the right quantum of investments, we can make that transition much faster. So, for example, we've issued green bonds in 2017 and 2019. We're looking to issue another one in 2020. And we're also exploring the use of debt for credit swaps, which enables us to find an innovative way to finance green projects and also allows us to free up our fiscal space and contribute to our foreign reserves. So essentially, we are trying to address several goals, by adopting this approach. So we're in talks with different organizations to make this happen. But like you said, it puts us in a very difficult situation, especially since, our contribution to net global emissions is pretty low. I think for Nigeria, it's less than 1 metric ton per capita in comparison to Europe and other parts of the world. So it does place us in a very difficult position. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we came on stage, I was told I have to extract pledges from all of our panelists today as to making one concrete action that will help to limit global warming in the next year, or personal action. So I'm going to ask each of you, can you offer the audience today? Monique, I think, has got one ready. Go for it.
Plenty of pledges I could make. But we spoke about joint procurement. But what we could pledge as a consumer movement in Europe is to organize collective purchases for people who want to invest into solar panels, for example, or heat pumps, or into energy efficiency solutions. Because by organizing collective purchases, that means that you test the quality as a consumer organization and you bring the price down. So that could be our contribution to having a low-cost energy efficiency investment.
Mark Bowman.
So as an institution, the EBRD is committed that from the end of this year, all of our investments will be Paris-aligned, and that will give us real kind of leverage in terms of delivering transformational change. In terms of a personal pledge, I'm personally much more conscious about my energy use and energy efficiency, and I'm not sure it counts as a pledge, but I'm challenging myself to how far I can get into the winter without turning on the heating in my house.
Right, I think a lot of people are doing that same challenge. Alberto De Paoli.
Well, I say, so we have the technologies needed, and so we have consumers ready and keen to change, and so to endorse the new messages. We need to work properly on a framework, on all the framework that will make available for companies, for the financial world, to get in investing and doing and offering new products at lower cost, and getting on the other side a secure, affordable and clean energy and transition.
Inka Babalola, any pledges you can offer us?
Yeah, so as a lowly special advisor to the Honorable Minister of Finance, I'm not in a position to actually make a pledge on behalf of the country, but all I can say is that we are committed to meeting all the obligations in our NDCs, and also to make sure that we ensure that we actually achieve net zero by 2060.
Okay, and for my own part, I'm a fairly keen cyclist, but I get extremely wimpy as soon as it gets very cold or very rainy. So I am going to pledge that I face the inclement weather with greater alacrity this winter and carry on biking, even when it's not very convenient to do so. Please join me in thanking our panelists, everyone. Thank you. And back to Sasha.
Thank you so much, and we're going to check on those pledges next year for sure. Thank you so much. We're going to be taking a short lunch break, and we're going to be back here for more at 2 o'clock. you.